Hey guys, Brockshield here. Back with you with the next video in our series, Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. Without further ado, returning to Great Expectations. My sister, who had begun to be alarmingly meditative, had to employ herself actively in getting the gin, the hot water, the sugar, and the lemon peel, and mixing them. For the time being, at least, I was saved. I still held on to the leg of the table, but clutched it now with the fervor of gratitude. By degrees I became calm enough to release my grasp and partake of pudding. Mr. Pumblechook partook of pudding. All partook of pudding. The course terminated, and Mr. Pumblechook had begun to beam under the genial influence of gin and water. I began to think I should get over the day when my sister said to Joe, "Clean plates, cold." I clutched the leg of the table again immediately, and pressed it to my bosom as if it had been the companion of my youth and friend of my soul. I foresaw what was coming, and I felt that this time I was really gone. "You must taste," said my sister, addressing the guest with her best grace. "You must taste, to finish with. Such a delightful and delicious present of Uncle Pumblechook's." "Must they? Must they? Let them not hope to taste it." "You must know," said my sister, rising. "It's a pie, a savory pork pie." The company murmured their compliments. Uncle Pumblechook, sensible of having deserved well of his fellow creatures, said quite vivaciously, all things considered, "Well, Mrs. Joe, we'll do our best endeavors. Let us have a cut at this same pie." My sister went out to get it. I heard her steps proceed to the pantry. I saw Mr. Pumblechook balance his knife. I saw reawakening appetite in the Roman nostrils of Mr. Wopsle. I heard Mr. Hubble remark that a bit of savory pork pie would lay atop of anything you could mention. "And do no harm," I heard Joe say. "You shall have some, Pip." I have never been absolutely certain whether I uttered a shrill yell of terror, merely in spirit, or in the bodily hearing of the company. I felt I could bear no more, and that I must run away. I realized the leg of the table and ran for my life. But I ran no further than the house door, for there I ran head foremost into a party of soldiers with their muskets, one of whom held out a pair of handcuffs to me, saying, "Here you are. Look sharp. Come on." Chapter 5. The apparition of a file of soldiers ringing down the butt ends of their loaded muskets on our doorstep caused the dinner party to rise from table in confusion, and caused Mrs. Joe, re-entering the kitchen empty-handed, to stop and stare, in her wondering lament of, good gracious, goodness gracious me, what's gone with the pie?" The sergeant and I were in the kitchen when Mrs. Joe stood staring, at which crisis I partially recovered the use of my senses. It was the sergeant who had spoken to me, and he was now looking round at the company, with his handcuffs invitingly extended towards them in his right hand, and his left on my shoulder. "Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen," said the sergeant, "but as I have mentioned at the door to this smart young shaver," which he hadn't, "I am on a chase in the name of the king, and I want the blacksmith." "And pray, what might you want with him?" retorted my sister, quick to resent his being wanted at all. "Missus," returned the gallant sergeant, "speaking for myself, I should reply, the honor and pleasure of his fine wife's acquaintance. Speaking for the king, I answer a little job done." This was received as rather neat in the sergeant, insomuch that Mr. Pumblechook cried audibly, "Good again!" "You see, blacksmith," said the sergeant, who had by this time picked out Joe with his eye. "We've had an accident with these, and I find the lock of one of 'em goes wrong, and the coupling don't act pretty. As they are wanted for immediate service, will you throw your eye over them?" Joe threw his eye over them, and pronounced that the job would necessitate the lighting of his forge fire, and would take nearer 2 hours than one. "Will it? Then will you set about it at once, blacksmith?" said the offhand sergeant. "As it's on His Majesty's service, and if my men can beat a hand anywhere, they'll make themselves useful." With that he called to his men, who came trooping into the kitchen, one after another, and piled their arms in a corner. And they stood about, as soldiers do, now with their hands loosely clasped before them, now resting a knee or a shoulder, now easing a belt or a pouch, now opening the door to spit stiffly over their high stocks, out into the yard. All these things I saw without then knowing that I saw them, for I was in an agony of apprehension, but beginning to perceive the handcuffs were not for me, and that the military had so far got the better of the pie as to put it in the background, I collected a little more of my scattered wits. "Would you give me the time?" said the sergeant, addressing himself to Mr. Pumblechook, as to a man whose appreciative powers justified the inference that he was equal to the time. "It's just gone 2:30. "That's not so bad," said the sergeant, reflecting. "Even if I was forced to halt here nigh 2 hours, that'll do. How far might you call yourselves from the marshes hereabouts? Not above a mile, I reckon." "Just a mile," said Mrs. Joe. "That'll do. We begin to close in upon 'em about dusk. A little before dusk, my orders are. That'll do." "Convicts, sergeant?" asked Mr. Wopsle in a matter-of-course way. "Aye," returned the sergeant. "2. They're pretty well known to be out on the marshes still, and they won't try to get clear of 'em before dusk. Anybody here seen anything of any such game?" Everybody, myself excepted, said no, with confidence. Nobody thought of me. "Well," said the sergeant, "they'll find themselves trapped in a circle, I expect, sooner than they count on. Now, blacksmith, if you're ready, His Majesty the King is." John had got his coat and waistcoat and cravat off, and his leather apron on, and passed into the forge. One of the soldiers opened its wooden windows, another lighted the fire, another turned to at the bellows. The rest stood round the blaze, which was soon roaring. Then Joe began to hammer and clink, and we all looked on. The interest of the impending pursuit not only absorbed the general attention, but even made my sister liberal. She drew a pitcher of beer from the cask for the soldiers, and invited the sergeant to take a glass of brandy. But Mr. Pumblechook said sharply, "Give him wine, Mum. I'll engage there's no tar in that." So the sergeant thanked him, and said that as he preferred his drink without tar, he would take wine if it was equally convenient. When it was given him, he drank His Majesty's health and compliments of the season, and took it all at a mouthful and smacked his lips. "Good stuff, eh, sergeant?" said Mr. Pumblechook. "I'll tell you something," returned the sergeant. "I suspect that stuff's of your providing." Mr. Pumblechook, with a fat sort of laugh, said, Aye. Why?" "Because," returned the sergeant, clapping him on the shoulder, "you're a man that knows what's what." "Do you think so?" said Mr. Pumblechook, with his former laugh. "Have another glass." We'll go ahead and stop there for this week. As usual, I want to say thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Please like, comment, and subscribe, as it greatly helps the channel. Light be with you all. Take care. And thanks again.